Please be seated.
As a parent of young children, I have started to embrace something I once thought to be absolutely ridiculous: the drive-through coffee shop. I know it's really terrible for the environment and the ultimate in laziness, but the ability to get a quick cup of coffee without unbuckling and rebuckling them into their car seats is one of the great luxuries of modern parenting. And as an aside, my kids are completely unaware that McDonald's sells food. They just call it the big coffee shop with the M. There's something amazing that's been happening in these drive-through coffee shops across North America. People have found that they pull up to pay for their drink and that the driver ahead of them has already paid for their order. And in return, many people then choose to pay for the person behind them and continue that chain. Tim Hortons has a catchphrase for this phenomenon: pouring it forward. In fact, at a Tim Hortons in Winnipeg 2 years ago, there was a continuous chain of this pouring it forward that lasted for 228 consecutive cars, over 3 hours of kindness. We like to read about these random acts of kindness in the news because they give us a nice feeling, especially now when kindness does not seem to be the modus operandi in much of the world. They are a reminder that there is still goodness out there and that it is human nature to be kind. But kindness can be challenging sometimes as a regular practice. We're all in a rush, stressed out, existing in our own little bubbles. Yes, we have a reputation here in Canada of having the nicest citizens in the whole world. Even our buses are apologetic and say sorry when they're full. But I don't think we can so easily hide behind our Canadian reputation and claim that all runs on kindness and goodwill, even here in Vancouver. Think about your past week for a minute. How many times were you cut off by another driver? How many times did you rush past someone who needed some attention because you didn't have the time? Were you ignored by a friend or brushed off by a coworker? Were you inclusive or exclusive in your social plans? We can each think of failures of kindness done to us or by us. Author George Saunders gave a very well-regarded commencement speech last spring at Syracuse University, in which, looking back over his life, he reflected on his biggest regrets. This is what he wrote: "What I regret most in my life are failures of kindness. Those moments when another human being was there, in front of me, suffering, and I responded reservedly, mildly." Or to look at it from the other end of the telescope, he continues, "Who in your life do you remember most fondly, with the most undeniable feelings of warmth? Those who were kindest to you, I bet. It's a little facile, maybe, and certainly hard to implement, but I'd say as a goal in life, you could do worse than try to be kinder." There's an important Jewish term for this kind of kindness. It's chesed, and it's one of the most foundational values of Judaism. In fact, it's so central that it is considered to be the foundation upon which the world is built. Today on Rosh Hashanah, we look back to the beginnings of the world's creation and celebrate the birthday of the world. One of my favorite Jewish descriptions about the world's beginnings is the mystical Kabbalistic tradition about a cosmic explosion It's like the Jewish Big Bang. The notion was brought forth by the 16th century rabbi Isaac Luria, who envisioned that there was this three-pronged approach to the creation of the world. In the first stage, called Tzimtzum, God contracted into God's self. The first action of divinity was an inward one. So if you could imagine that God was filling up the space of the entire presence of the universe, every iota of space, and then shrinking, contracted into God's self to allow room for everything else in creation. Out of this space grew light, and the light was contained in vessels emanating from God. And the light was so strong that the vessels shattered. Some of that light was returned to God, its source, and some of it filtered down and became the source of all life. The broken shards of those vessels became the basis of our material world. And then finally, the third prong was, or I shall say, there will be tikkun, a mending of those broken vessels. Tikkun is a word familiar to us. We hear it often in the context of social action, in our pursuit of tikkun olam, mending the world. Rabbi Luria believed that the third stage in the creation of the world of tikkun was a mending of those shattered vessels. This creative stage is one that takes place not at God's insistence, but with a human partnership and with cooperation. So if we are going to bring those shards together, if we are going to build our world, then the psalmist teaches, Olam chesed yibaneh. We are to rebuild the world with kindness, with chesed. We often hear chesed translated as loving kindness, but it's so much more than this. It's so much deeper. It's what we do for people without payback or cause. It's being proactive towards another person for no other reason that there is a need to fill. It means being good-hearted and having a good attitude, treating people with respect, compassion, and sensitivity. It means identifying a need, pain, or trouble in another person and doing all that you can. In our liturgy for these holidays, God is called El Rachum V'Chanun, Erech Apayim V'Rav Chesed, the eternal, merciful, gracious God who is endlessly kind. Today we call God endlessly kind. When we are at our most vulnerable, and as we confess a year of wounds, short tempers, and shortfalls, God responds by raining down on us endless chesed. And so it is that when we are kind, it's not just a nice thing to do, but rather we are acting in God's image, doing God's work. And when we pray, as we just did a few moments ago, Avinu Malkeinu, when we lay bare our deeds and say to God, Ein banu ma'asim, we've got nothing, God. We've got nothing. We beg, Aseh imanu tzedakah v'chesed, deal with us with generosity and kindness. God, be nice. V'hoshienu, for your kindness will save us. And so can our chesed too, if we're determined to save others with kindness. My friend and colleague, Rabbi Stephanie Colin, opened my eyes to this reading of Avinu Malkeinu. Imagine the world we could begin to create, she writes, if we decided that kindness is the absolute baseline of our interactions and the greatest measure of our success. And if we taught our children that too. But one thing that chesed certainly is not is random. In fact, I think we need to rid ourselves of the term random acts of kindness in order to really understand what is expected of us in our pursuit of kindness. Think back to our Tim Hortons example. When we pay it forward and pass along the kindness we have received from the person who drove in front of us, have we actually encountered one another in that act? No, the only person we encountered is the Tim Hortons employee at the window. And that kindness with which we engaged with that person behind us or at the window was not an intentional part of our day. It was reactive, when chesed needs to be proactive. So we need to hold the door open at the cafe, to look into the eyes of the person helping to take our order, to truly see the people standing before us. When we encounter each other, truly engage with one another in direct actions of chesed, then we are doing our part to heal the world of brokenness. Olam chesed yibaneh. Chesed is the foundation upon which we will rebuild our world. On a practical level, this means living our lives with openness to giving and receiving chesed. Here at Temple Sholom, we have actually a new chesed committee, spearheaded lovingly by Barbara Halperin and Susan Croft. They facilitate opportunities to engage in these kinds of actions directly, from visiting someone who is ill to preparing a meal of condolence after a funeral, or visiting parents with a new baby. We should really be proud of the work that the Chesed Committee has already undertaken in just the first few months of its existence. But we should also know that the Chesed Committee does not work by proxy. They can't do it for the rest of us. Each one of us has a responsibility to engage in this work, here in the shul or elsewhere, and it can be difficult to know where exactly to start. So I'm going to give you a concrete suggestion, something we all can do in a very traditional Jewish way. Shiva. This might be one of the most uncomfortable acts of chesed that we can do for one another and expect from one another. How can I just show up at someone's home for a Shiva minyan after a funeral when I might not even know that person? They'll think I'm barging in on their private space. And why would I want people I barely know visiting me when I'm sick at heart or offering me comfort when I grieve? How do I know when to ask, or if it's appropriate to ask for help? These are all good questions, and the discomfort and awkwardness we have around issues of death and being in need are things that people have probably felt for many centuries. For precisely this reason, Jewish tradition has organized things so that one doesn't need to ask. The obligations are clear for all concerned. Jewish law requires a minyan, quorum of 10 adults to say Kaddish. So a mourner does not invite members of the community into her home. Those members are coming to fulfill a loving obligation of consoling the bereaved, an act of chesed. Yet the experience of Shiva Minyan extends far beyond a ritual obligation. More than once, I've had people tell me that they were nervous about going to a Shiva house of someone they didn't know. And yet once they arrived, they realized how important it was to be there. And similarly, I've heard from those who were initially wary of having strangers in their home at a time of grief, how comforting it felt to be surrounded by expressions of love and support, to know that the community was there for them, regardless of how many familiar faces filled the room. These personal stories speak to ways in which the communal experience of Jewish mourning, of sitting Shiva, can be an important first step of the creation of mutual concern for one another, the first step in fostering relationship between otherwise unconnected members of the community. Chesed is the foundation upon which the world will be rebuilt. It is the glue that will hold our broken world together and bring us closer when we need it most. The Torah begins with an act of chesed as God clothes Adam and Eve, and it ends with chesed as God buries Moses. It's one big chain of chesed stretching from the beginning to the end. Each act sets off another in the reaction. sort of like the coffee chain at Tim Hortons, except that it's without end. It goes full circle, and we each have to find ourselves within that chain, with an expectation that it is with chesed that we will begin each day, and with chesed that we will end. This year, when there is another human being before us suffering, may we respond with kindness pouring out of our hearts. May our kindness become so very routine that not one more widow feels like a burden, not one more senior goes to bed feeling lonely, not one more kid feels like he has to face the world alone, not one more fellow congregant has no place to go for Shabbat or Seder, not one more sick person suffers in isolation. Shana tova u'metuka u'ma'alei chesed. May this be a new year in which we build our world with profound acts of chesed. May we receive it and give it, and may we each be overflowing with the sweetness of extremely unrandom acts of kindness. Shana tova.